Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today goes by the name of Vecnan and is primarily a card counter. Vecnan, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, how'd you get started in the AP world, and how long ago was this?
I actually had to look back at my records. I started counting cards 12 years ago. I kind of grew up, I was in college during the poker boom, and so I started off, I think like everybody else of that era, thinking I was going to be a professional poker player. So I spent a couple years pursuing that. Kind of found out into it that I didn't really like the aspect of the game that you can kind of second guess everything about the game. Even if you do well, you can second guess all of your decisions. So when I found out about blackjack and that there always was a correct decision, that really appealed to me. Then from there, I kind of trained up on it. It took me about a year to save up my first bankroll. Went and played that for a while. Lost money on that bankroll. And I think ultimately kind of had to step away from the game for personal reasons for a couple months. And then when I went back and retrained, found out that I was doing just all kinds of things wrong. So I think taking that time away and kind of refocusing helped a lot. And then from there.
How did you find out that you were doing things wrong? Did you have somebody watch you play? Or?
No, I went back to my training materials. I took, 4 or 5 months away from the game. So I'm like, well, I should spend another couple weeks training back up before I get back into it. And just reviewing the materials, I found out that I was just like, in the beginning, I wasn't sure. Like I knew that for betting, you use the true count. But for deviations, I thought you just use the running count. Like there were just some really simple things that I was just unclear on. And didn't have anybody to tell me any differently. So I'm glad that I kind of went back to the source materials and found out I was making some pretty ridiculous mistakes in my first go around.
Did you take any classes or belong to the forums or have any gurus to help you?
No, so I was actually entirely self-taught. Just reading books, basically read every book I could get my hands on as regards blackjack and listened to you guys. Like I've been listening to the show for a really long time and just kind of adding little bits and pieces of information that I found along the way. It wasn't until the last maybe 2 years of my career that I actually started joining the forums and kind of learning that way. Just early on wasn't something that I did.
So you started writing articles about blackjack. What kind of articles and where did you post them?
Yeah, so when I was playing full time, I found out that there was kind of a local gambling insert in the paper. It was once a month, once every 2 weeks, something like that. And I read through it the first time I saw it, found out that they had a person who wrote about video slots. They had a person that wrote about poker, video poker, things like that, but nobody for blackjack. So I just reached out and said, hey, I'm a professional player. If you want somebody to write about the game, I'd love to do it. They said that I could. Kind of the only criteria that they put on that was because it was sponsored by casinos. As far as like the ad revenue, they didn't want me to talk about ways to actually beat the game. So I was kind of confined to basic strategy, bankroll management, kind of some of the lesser aspects of the game. But I found it really interesting to kind of research and dig into those ideas a little deeper than I think most players do.
How did you go from, so you went back to the game, you realized you were making mistakes, you cleaned up your game. How did you go from there to full-time professional?
Yeah, so my first bankroll, I started with about $10,000 and I lost maybe 1,000 of that over 100 hours, which was probably lucky given how bad I was playing at the time. So then I took some time off. I got a much better job, so I was able to save up some more money. My second bankroll started with about $25,000, and I ended up winning like 45,000 in my first 200 hours. Like it just took off in a way that I wasn't expecting at all. Like originally my intention was if this is a fun break-even hobby, I can make a little bit of money, great. If not, whatever. But then I just started printing money. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should take this a little bit more seriously. And so then based on those results, I said, well, I'll just step into full-time and did it for about 2 years after that as a full-time traveling playing pro.
And what made you change? What stopped after 2 years?
So the money was good. It's a fun job, but I kind of hated the lifestyle. I think people underestimate how hard this job is. I think blackjack's a very easy game on a technical level, but when you get into kind of the social side of things and kind of the emotional with the variance and being on the road all the time, it can just wear you down a lot. And so not having any connections to any other players or anything like that, I just kind of got sick of it. I think at my height, I was traveling like every other week to play, which made it really hard to have any semblance of a normal life when I was actually at home in town. You know, friends would be like, hey, come to my birthday party. I'm like, nope, I'm out of town that week. Like, just not happening. So I wasn't enjoying it as much as I wanted to. And I kind of prioritized lifestyle over money. So I'm just like, this is just too much of a headache to deal with.
No, I completely get that, and I agree that people underestimate that aspect of the job. Like, if you could just, go to the casino and sit down and play for 8 hours a day, then yeah, it'd be a great job. But between the amount of travel and the heat and getting thrown out and the swings, it can be pretty brutal.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my players the other day, and he's like, what I think people don't understand about this is when you're on the road, like, no one likes you. Like, the dealer doesn't like you because you're not tipping. The players don't like you because you're playing weird. The pit boss doesn't like you because you buy in for too much. Like, no one on the road is happy that you're there. They don't smile at you. They're not friendly in general. And there are exceptions to that, but when you're on the road all the time, it just feels like, well, everyone hates me and this is terrible, right?
And did you have a girlfriend during this time? Because that also can be a problem if you're on the road every other week.
Yeah, so I got fortunate that I started dating my now wife right after I started playing blackjack. So she knew that it was part of my life kind of going into all of this, and she was able to see my early results and how well I was doing. So it was never a matter of, oh, I don't know if you should be doing this or whatever, because I was kind of successful at it right at the beginning of our dating period when she just kind of, we were such a new relationship. She's like, well, you can do whatever you want. Just saw that I was doing really well. So I think the timing on that worked out really well.
Did she keep that attitude when losing streaks happened?
Yeah, she's always just kind of trusted me, trusted the math. I think part of it is the swings never particularly bothered me. I've got kind of a strong math background, so I just assumed that they would happen, and so I never particularly freaked out when I went through big losing streaks. So I think that just extended to her and her trusting that I knew what I was doing.
When you say big losing streak, I mean, did you ever hit a 200-hour losing streak?
Oh yeah. Oh, I've had tons of those. I actually think I'm one of the most unlucky players ever in blackjack.
Have you read the Blackjack Discord? I'm just kidding. Because there are some people there who think they are the unluckiest people in the world. But
well, I think part of it's the way that I structure my game. I actually play at a higher risk of ruin. So I play at about a 5% risk of ruin and do pretty frequent resizings, which can extend losing streaks, right? When you lose at higher bets and you have to win it back at lower bets, it just takes longer, which is something that I'm completely fine with. But it puts you in situations where 200-300 hour losing streaks are not actually that common.
Right, and one thing I think people need to understand is when you say 5% risk of ruin, your risk of ruin is actually 0 because you're resizing when you start losing. So you don't actually have a 5% chance of losing all your money.
Right, so that's top line risk of ruin. And the reason I do that is because it's higher EV, right? Like,
sure.
On average, I'm getting more EV than somebody running a 1% risk of ruin when ultimately I have the same possibility of losing all of my money. So I prefer to run a slightly higher risk of ruin and go through the effort of resizing and the headache of going through longer losing streaks to get the higher EV. I've always been comfortable with that.
But that also implies bigger bets, which implies when you do start winning, you're more likely to get kicked out. Have you experienced a lot of that?
Yeah, I've had surprisingly few backoffs in my career, which I attribute to a couple things. When I first started playing, I was super heavy into cover, like way more than I should have been. And I think that's cost me a ton of money over my career, but I never knew any better.
So what kind of cover?
I just did it. Oh, just everything. Terrible, terrible things. At one point, I tried the Ultimate Gambit from the Burning the Tables in Vegas. That was a bit too much, but kind of those types of ideas, like little things where you're giving up dollars here, dollars there. I also, when I started out, did more of a hit and run strategy. So for, I don't know, maybe the first year I was full time, I probably didn't play a session longer than 2 hours ever. Which in retrospect left a bunch of money on the table that way as well. But you just don't get backed off if they don't even know you're there until you're a threat and then you leave. So
but
I have had plenty of backoffs, but I think relative to the hours I put into the game, they're pretty low.
Any bad backoffs?
No, I've been trespassed one time, and technically they backroomed me, but it was possibly the least intimidating thing I've ever experienced. It was just like a little medical unit in the back, and they're like, "Hey, how about you sign this?" I'm like, "No, thanks." They're like, "Okay, don't come back." I'm like, "Okay." I've been fortunate. I've not had any particularly threatening backoffs.
So what? You said that if they don't even know you're there, you don't tend to get back off. But it sounds like you changed your approach. Why?
Yeah. So obviously, early in my career, I was not a member of forums. I wasn't participating in kind of the larger blackjack community, so I didn't really have anyone to tell me that some of these things were costing me a pile of money. When I came back to the game a couple of years ago, I ended up jumping on the forums and kind of reading through some stuff. And obviously, people have a very different perspective on the game now than they did 12 years ago, I think. I think that's kind of when that approach started getting popular, but it wasn't everywhere on the internet like it is now. So we've started playing a much more aggressive game kind of in this most recent iteration of the Bankroll.
But you're still focused on longevity, are you not?
Yeah, so I think I still like looking at cover plays. I think when you think about cover plays, a lot of the known cover plays are expensive and don't really get you much. But I think if you think outside the box a little bit, there are some other things you can do that either don't cost you money or cost you very little money, and ultimately get you some extra longevity. I mean, if you can give up, call it 10% of your edge and get another hour or two at a casino, that's a good trade as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
If you're giving up 50% of your edge, that's insane.
Right. And do you want to talk about what any of those kind of things are?
Not particularly, because right now we've got a couple things that are working that I'm a big fan of. But I think in general, if people can just think a little outside the box, like think about the way that surveillance perceives you. Like some of the ideas that I've had have actually come from the episodes you guys have done with surveillance people and how they talk about blackjack and how they look at card counters. And I think right now, a lot of the card counters that are out there are just cookie cutter copies of each other. They look the same. They talk the same. I think I can pick most of them off before they even sit down at the table. Like it's easy.
I agree with you 100%, and I often have picked off card counters before they sat down at a table. I think you're 100% right. And most of them just don't seem to have any idea how obvious they are.
Well, I was playing the other day, and this girl sits down, and the very first thing she says is, "Hey, sometimes I play one hand, sometimes I play two hands." And I'm like, "Oh my God, fine, whatever." And then we get to a true two. I'm like, "There it is." Like,
yeah.
I'm like, this is like just think a little bit about the way you act in a casino so that you're not the same as every other card counter out there.
So when I was a dealer 40 years ago, I worked with a shift boss, and he used to call card counters students, right? Students of the game. And I remember standing on a dead table, and a guy walked in the door, and the shift boss says to me, "Oh, this guy's a student, watch." Now, remember, this is 40 years ago, and we had $5 minimum single-deck tables, and with, of course, 3-2 and stand 17. But he says, watch. He goes, "This guy's going to buy in for $40, ask for some silver, and then order orange juice and coffee." And that was the pattern for a lot of these card counters.
Yeah, we've got our local market, because of the limits, we've got a bunch of low-level card counters, and I can pick them off walking up to the table. Like, just the way that they look at the game, I'm like, just go, dude. And then they buy in for like $300 bills. I'm like, oh, please stop. Like, because they're oblivious to the fact that I'm already on that table. I'm like, great, so now I just have to leave because I'm not going to do this.
Well, you also could be more proactive and say, like, I'd rather play alone, or do you mind finding another table, or, any of those kind of things.
Yeah, and pre-COVID, that wasn't much of an issue because I could usually just bump the table limits. Now with COVID, it's a little harder to find solo games, just because the table limits are higher everywhere. But yeah, I would generally do some preemptive things to make my table less appealing than the table next to it to everyone, not just card counters. But
so, at some point, you decided to form a team. How did that happen?
Yeah, so after I played the 2 years, I took a long time off, and then played kind of hobby level during those years, but I wasn't, make a couple $1,000s a year, don't really travel at all, just keeping it active. And then my wife and I ended up having our son. He's about 3 now. And the plan was for me to be a stay-at-home dad because I wasn't really enjoying the job that I was doing at that point. My wife makes good money, and so decided to be a stay-at-home dad. But I also knew that if that's all I did, I'd probably end up hating my life, just not having the ability to do anything as an adult. So decided to get back into blackjack, and really my main problem with the game was just being on the road by myself. I just didn't enjoy it. So I figured, well, let's find some people that will go on the road with me. I'll train them up, and then I'll have people that I can talk to about the game, share my experiences with, and, at least having someone on the road with you that's happy that you're there helps a lot. Just even if it's, 10 minutes of conversation in the hotel room before you go to bed. So I didn't know any of those people, so I figured I'll just make some. Seemed super easy at the time.
So how'd you find them? How'd you decide to get people? Did you put an ad in the paper?
Close enough.
Worse.
Worse, yeah. I ended up putting a couple just Craigslist ads, general work ads out there, and seeing, mostly out of curiosity, seeing what I would find. Worst case scenario, I meet a couple people that are crazy and I move on. But fortunately, I think I found some solid people on there. So.
Right. So this is the reason I wanted to have you on the show, because when I heard this story that you advertised on Craigslist for blackjack teammates, it just sounded insane to me. So tell us how that went. How many people responded? What did you say to them when you met up with them? How did that go?
Yeah. So this process has been really weird.
That doesn't surprise me that it's been weird.
You get all kinds of responses and all kinds of things that are just insane. And like half the times that I've put a Craigslist out there, people have responded with, "Isn't this illegal?" I'm like, no, I would like, can you just stop responding to things that are dumb? My number one criteria is like anyone that says that they've played blackjack before is just dead to me. Like, I've had so many people contact me and be like, yeah, I use this obscure, really hard system. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I can't help you. Either you're actually good at the game and you don't need to play with my money, or you're terrible and I don't need to retrain you. So I actually preferred people that had basically no experience with the game at all. But people that I thought for whatever reason were hard workers or trustworthy, and would actually put in the time and energy to learn this. So.
Well, that's the key, right? I mean, because, there are, I just know so many people who have had money stolen by teammates, right? Where they, just misreport their wins and losses, and they're just stealing. And sometimes that even happens with people who are friends and family members. So to get complete strangers, what is it? What is it that made you find the people you trusted? Just gut instinct?
A little bit. Part of it also is the process. I basically just made it an uphill battle the entire way. At no point did I make it easy. At no point did I make it fun. Like, if you're going to get to the point that I'm actually going to give you money to play this game, you're going to put in hundreds of hours of training, unpaid. And honestly, on the tail end of that, if you steal from me, like, I don't know that it's worth your time. Like, it's just, and then once we get to the training, even then we ramp up really slowly. So it's not like you've gone through the training, now here's $100,000, go play. They start very, very small and just gradually ramp up over time. So it's a really slow, deliberate process that gives a lot of time for the two of us to interact, for them to interact with other members of the team and make sure that everybody trusts everybody, everybody's feeling good about this. And ultimately it's just inefficient to steal because of the time commitment that's required up front.
So how many players have you actually found that you are working with?
So let's see. From Craigslist specifically, I think we have 4. And then my top player ended up referring 2 of his friends who are on there as well. So the first year, it was basically me and my first player. We brought in another guy at the tail end of that year. So this was 2019. We brought him on the tail end, but it was basically just the 2 of us. And then when COVID happened, I did another round of recruiting, kind of hoping to find one more person, and I ended up finding 4. I don't know why. I was not looking for 4, but I just ran into some guys that I really liked, and so now they're ramping up very slowly. They're nowhere near top of Bankroll at this point, but
how many of you are actually out playing? Just 2 of you, or is there more?
So everybody is on the road in some sense at this point if they want to be. We've got a couple people that are being a little weird about COVID currently, which is fine. But yeah, anybody that wants to travel can travel at this point. It's just a matter of what stakes they play.
I see. So you start them out at smaller stakes, and then as they progress, they raise their stakes.
Right. Yeah. So we don't just dump people into the deep end.
And are you doing any kind of team play, or are you just everybody's working off the same bankroll?
Yeah, at this point it's mostly just a team of solo players. I definitely think team play is in the future if we can find the right opportunities, but at this point it's just kind of easier for, we usually send 2 or 3 people out to a location at a time, but that's mostly just for buying chips, selling chips, ease of use in some sense.
Do you find it more efficient to train the people yourself or to use, say, Blackjack Apprenticeship or some other training organization?
I like to train them myself. I put together my own training program for me years ago, and so I just put them through that. And I've thought about having like one of the other players on the team train somebody, but I just like the FaceTime. It helps to build trust. It helps to learn strengths and weaknesses of an individual player, make sure that I know their game at least as well as they do before we send them anywhere.
But now
I like to largely do that personally.
If you send 2 or 3 players to location, can't they kind of get in each other's way or potentially bring heat on each other? Right? If there's one card counter in a casino, it's different than if there are 3 all in the same casino.
We try to avoid overlapping casinos. Right now, we've been fine traveling to mostly bigger markets, so just kind of have people cycle through places. We've had a couple issues where people are stepping on each other's feet, but I think when you send 2 people to one geography, it's generally not that bad. 3 to 4 can be a bit much, but it depends on where you're going.
And in terms of your thinking about, do your players, are they refusals or do they use players' cards?
Technically, I let them make their own decision on that, but I pretty strongly advise being a refusal. Different people on the team have different goals. Some of the guys really want this to be a full-time thing and do this for a number of years. And so those guys, I'm like, hey, just don't ever give your name ever. Other people are a little more casual about it. And I'm like, you know what, if you want the comps, fine. Just know that they're going to go away and you're going to have more headaches on the back end. But for the guys that are taking it more seriously, I tell them, hey, just don't ever do it.
The problem that several of us have experienced with, if you want the comps, go ahead, is suddenly they're afraid of getting heat in the casino because that's the place where they're getting their great comps. So maybe they don't spread as often as they should or as much as they should. There's kind of a real danger there when you're letting them go after comps in that way.
Yeah, we haven't had anybody lean too heavily into that line yet. But yeah, that's definitely something that I'll need to keep in mind going forward. I think most people are going to tend towards the refusal route because that's personally how I do it.
Yeah, well, it's also your team and your money, right? So you could just make that a requirement.
Right.
What about, do you change your spread or top bet depending on the market someone is going to or a different casino in that same market?
Yeah, so I think this is one of maybe our strengths that I think a lot of people don't think about as much. I'm actually big on like trying to figure out what a casino will tolerate, right? Like certain casinos, you can do certain spreads and you're entirely invisible. Other casinos, you go to that same place, put that same spread out there, and within 30 minutes, every phone in the floor is ringing. So I think what we do, because we have some numbers and we can just kind of cycle people through places, we just try stuff. Just say, hey, go in with this spread, see what happens. Next time, go in with this spread, see what happens. And then we kind of figure out what casinos can tolerate and just make a note of it. And the next time somebody goes there, say, okay, here's what they take. Are you willing to play for $100 an hour? If so, I think you can camp here for a while. If not, you can play bigger, but you won't last as long. And just kind of give people the freedom to choose their own adventure in that sense.
So how does your bankroll split work?
So I basically just pay commission. So everybody gets paid off of their individual results.
Off their EV or off their actual win-loss?
Yeah, their actual win-loss.
Certainly not after every trip, right? You have some minimum number of hours?
It is after every trip, but there are some safeguards in place to make sure that the people aren't free rolling.
Well, so what happens if somebody has a losing trip?
They just don't get paid for a while. They just have to play until they peak again. So it's paid based on peak, not based on individual trip wins.
Right, I see. So if they lose on the next trip, they're making up the loss, and then once they get ahead again, they get a percentage of that.
Correct. So I make it very clear to my guys, and this is one of the negatives that I point out really early in the process. You can go for weeks, months, whatever, without getting paid. So either you need to have some money set aside, or you need to have a flexible part-time job that you can pair this with until you're at the point that you have made a bunch of money doing this.
So do they pool their results with other players? Because usually one of the benefits of a team is that, a 200-hour losing streak split across 4 players is a lot easier to stomach than an individual.
Right. So not really. They're given the option to invest in the bankroll, so they can kind of diversify that way, because then they get a percentage of everyone. But still, most of the pay is based on their individual results, and that means that sometimes that when they are in a 200-300 hour losing streak, which we've had, they just don't get paid for a while.
So you've had a player hit a 200 or 300 hour losing streak, and he dug out of it and continued playing until he got ahead again?
Yep.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
A couple of them.
Because that's usually when they quit, right?
Yes.
We have lots more questions for Vecnan, but we need to take a brief commercial break. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. This is more than anyone else has. In January, the promotion is the $400,000 spin to win, Monday through Thursday, 3 a.m. to 2:59 a.m. You play every $2,000 coin in on video poker. You get one spin that this year has been averaging about $15 per spin. Limit of 4 per day, Monday through Thursday. Now, if your card is in before 3 a.m., you can continue to play on yesterday until you get your 4 spins, and then in which case you would pull your card and put it back in again. However, if you get a W2G or otherwise pull your card, then yesterday has ended, assuming it's after 3 a.m., and today begins. The spins are higher this year. An average of $15 per spin is significantly higher than the $12 a spin it was doing before. And I believe that is being done on purpose by the casino to encourage you to come into play. At predicted.org, it's a market where you can place small bets on the occurrence of various political events, mostly but not entirely in the United States. So when this is first posted, Donald Trump has approximately a week left in his term. There are still a lot of active markets on what's going to happen in that last week, including impeachment, including the 25th Amendment, including resigning, including all sorts of things. There are other markets as to which candidates are going to run for offices in the future and when will they announce. Gambling with an Edge listeners receive a one-time offer of a deposit match up to $20 at predicted.org/promo/edge. You must play the money through once and cannot withdraw it for 20 days. Videopoker.com is the best place to play lots of video poker games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. The game of the week is Face Card Frenzy. You may play this game anywhere from 6 coins per line through 10 coins, with the odds increasing as you increase your bet. In this game, full houses and quads, including jacks, queens, kings, and aces, return a lot more than other full houses and quads. To make the math work, all pay schedules are bumped up, meaning that you need an entirely new strategy to play this game. In addition, no games in this variety were released returning more than 99%, so it would take one hell of a promotion to make this game worth learning. All right, we're back talking with Vecnan. You told us in our notes that you once shut down a craps promotion. What was that all about?
Yeah, so this was when I was playing full time. I just noticed a promotion that a casino was having where they give you these punch cards where when 4 extremely unlucky things happen, you get either $50 or $100 payout. And so, for example, the blackjack one was if you hit all 4 different suits of suited blackjack, then they'd pay you, I don't remember if it was $50 or $100, whatever. Once you had all the punches, you turn it in and they'd give you the cash. For craps, though, the criteria was you had to hit all 4 hard ways. And that was it. There was no, you had to hit them all in the same roll. There was no minimum bet. You could just hit them ever. You had to be betting them, but you still got the standard payout. And this promotion was supposed to run, I think it was for 2 months. and I was working a regular job at that point, and I just told my wife, like, I'm just gonna go play this after work every day. And so I did, and after about a week, they limited it. It was also unlimited punch cards. After about a week, they limited it to 2 punch cards a day. Fine, wasn't quite as profitable, but then a couple days later, they limited it to 1 punch card a day, and I think after about 2 weeks, they just stopped doing it for the craps. They kept all the other ones going. And I think I was in there card counting a couple weeks later, and some guy comes in and says, "Hey, what happened to that craps promotion you were playing?" The pit boss is like, "Yeah, we decided to stop doing that one, but we have all the other ones." It's like, "Oh, that's unfortunate. What happened?" The pit boss just looks at me and goes, "Him." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
So you were betting like $5 on the pass line and $1 on each of the hard ways, and with a pretty high AV in that, something like that.
Yeah. And then as soon as I hit one, I drop that bet and keep the others up. It was insane that they didn't put any additional criteria on that.
Well, especially in the beginning, if there was no limit on how many punch cards you could have.
Yeah, it was a fun couple of days. I don't know what they were thinking. And the pit boss just at some point just started rolling her eyes every time she paid me. I'm like, you know why I'm here. I know why I'm here. You can stop it if you need to. I don't care.
Now, when you're convinced you're about to be backed off, do you stay or just let them go through with it? And what kind of results have you had?
I generally stay. I've had a couple situations where I was 100% convinced I was going to get backed off, and then something else insane happened. So like one of them, I was sitting at this table. I'd been there for a while, and at this point I was betting 2 hands of table max, and I see a suit standing behind me, and I'm like, well, whatever. At this point we're done, so I'm just going to keep playing until I actually get the tap. And didn't come. Get to the end of the shoe. The security guard goes, "Excuse me, sir." I'm like, okay. Turn around. He's talking to the other guy at the table. I'm like, well, this is interesting. And he just looks at him and goes, it appears to us that you might be too inebriated to play the game right now. I'm like, what is happening? Like, I was 100% convinced that they were there for me, and they backed off this other guy who was sitting there betting, $25 a hand or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I had one of my local shops, a place that I'd played for years. I just walked in one day, sat down, bought in. Immediately, the pit boss gets on the phone and says, "I need security to come to blackjack table 5 or whatever." I look, I'm at blackjack table 5, literally the only person there. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm done here. And so I wait, I play for a little bit. About 5 minutes later, security guard comes up, him and the pit boss talk for a couple minutes. And then pit boss goes, opens up the podium, empties the trash, and hands a trash bag to the security guard to take out. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I just walked in at exactly the wrong time.
Yeah, it's so important. Colin, in his book, calls it barring yourself. And it's so important to not do that, because so many times we think that it's, as you say, like, well, they must be here to bar me. And often it's just something else that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But you're not the center of the casino universe, and it's so important to learn to play through a lot of those situations, because it may have absolutely nothing to do with you.
Well, and if you are backed off, it's not like they're going to forget you 2 weeks later when you come back, so you might as well know and just not come back, right? Yeah. Versus wasting a trip or whatever.
Well, and this is doubly true if you're in a place that you've traveled far away and you're not planning to be back there for a long time anyway. So
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases it's just better to know definitively which one it is.
Yeah, and the other one that happens so often is, a new suit gets called into the pit boss, starts talking to him, and they're both looking over at you at the table, and you're like, oh, here it comes. And then it turns out the guy's a host. And he comes over and gives you his card and asks if he can get you anything. And
the first time one of my players got a host, he freaked out. Like somebody tapped him on the shoulder, goes, "Excuse me, sir." He's like, "Oh, damn it!" Like he's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "Weird, but like I'm a host and I'd like to." He's like, "Oh, this is not at all what I thought was happening right now."
Right.
Also in the notes, you told us something about candy bars.
Yeah, I was at this casino. I played at this one casino forever, and I don't know why, but they had this policy of they refused to tell you your comp balance. They just wouldn't do it. And I knew I had a ton of comps at this place, and I knew that I wasn't going to be coming back to this place for a while. And so I went to the deli and bought myself lunch, a couple other stuff. And I'm like, "Hey, can you tell me what my remaining balance is?" They're like, "No, we can't do that." I'm like, "Okay, well then I'd like to buy some candy bars." They're like, "How many?" I'm like, "How many can I buy?" Like, "We can't tell you." I'm like, "Fine, I'll buy all of them." They're like, "Are you serious right now?" I'm like, "Yes, I'll buy all your candy bars." So the lady calls the manager. The manager had no idea what was going on. She's like, "Are you serious about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, just give me all the candy bars until my comp balance is gone." And I had no concept of what my comp balance even was. But by the end of it, I think I was carrying like 8 boxes of candy bars out the door because it's like, I don't know, I'm not going to spend it on anything else. And I ended up giving those to a youth group I was working with at the time. I'm like, "Here, you guys like candy?"
That's funny. I mean, usually, like my suggestion would have been like, yeah, go somewhere like the deli and see if you can find out your comp balance from the girl at the counter, because so often those people don't care, right? So that's surprising that even they had been trained not to tell you your comp balance.
Yeah, massive secret. Nobody can know. It's not like they even, like this property didn't even have like a steakhouse or anything where I could have spent $200-300 on a meal. They had a buffet and they had this deli, so I don't know what they were protecting against.
I once spent a lot of my comp balance on Carmex, which is similar to chapsticks. So found out that I cleaned them out of 80 tubes or something of Carmex, and that stuff doesn't really age well, in case you wanted to know. But
especially if you keep it in the garage in Las Vegas in 120-degree heat.
Yeah, it comes out really easily when you do that.
2 decades later, it's not the same.
So you tell us that you had your first AP play was back in high school.
Yeah, it was. I don't know what happened. We had after prom, they do an after midnight event, and they had a casino night, and parents were working the event, and so I guess none of them had ever really been to a casino. And when you walk in the door, they give everybody like $1,500, and you're just supposed to go play, and you can buy raffle tickets or whatever. I found out that the person who was running the roulette wheel literally had no idea how it worked. And so in addition to paying you when you hit a number, they also paid, like when you're betting on an individual number, they also paid you if you were in the right row or if you were in the right column. So not just betting the row and column, but when you're actually betting the number, they would pay you for the row in the column. And I ran that $1,500.
I could beat that game.
Yeah. I was going to say, I knew nothing about being an AP at the time, but I'm like, this isn't right. And so I turned the $1,500 into like 1.4 million, and like the bank owed me money because they just didn't have enough cash to pay me. I'm like, this is dumb, guys. And then I bought all the raffle tickets for the top prize and surprisingly won it. So
Was it worth winning?
it was a PlayStation 2 at the time.
Wow.
That seemed like a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the math teacher running the roulette wheel.
No, I don't know. Yeah, clearly this guy had like 2 seconds of training and missed some very key elements of how roulette works.
Is your team planning to branch out to beyond card counting, whether they're hole carding or any other types of blackjack play?
Yeah, so some of them really want to. Richard, you've talked to Frank. He wants everything. But I've trained in some of those skills. Gotten pretty good at some things. My problem right now is it doesn't take a lot of time and energy for me to maintain my blackjack game. It takes a lot more time and energy to maintain some of these other skills. And with me not being on the road as much because I'm primarily, staying home, raising my son, it's just not really worth training up those skills and maintaining them. I probably will teach them some of those things. I've already taught my top couple things, but I find that some of the more advanced blackjack skills, there just aren't a lot of games out there that allow them. I think if we had found more games that could be beaten via those methods, I'd maybe have a different interest, but I'm just not finding a lot of games that those work on at the moment.
Yeah, when people ask me, just for example, about learning to shuffle track, my advice is always find a game first, because there are so few games left where it's worthwhile to try to shuffle track that to spend a lot of time learning it and then just never finding a game to play, it's just not worth your time and effort.
Well, and not just finding a game where you can use the skill, but finding a game where you can use the skill and they'll take a significant amount of action, right? Like it's not just like some places you bet $300, $400, $500 a hand and they're immediately all over you, not because they think you're doing anything, just because they don't like those bets.
Right.
So even if you can find a good game, it's not always guaranteed that you're going to get any money down.
Thank you, Vecnan. This has been very interesting. At the end of our show, we have a recommended section where at least Richard, sometimes me, and sometimes our guests tell us something that they think our audience is interested in. Richard, do you have something for us today?
Yeah, my recommended this week is a recent episode of a podcast called Hidden Brain. I've mentioned this podcast before. It's a great podcast in general, but the recent episode is called A Creature of Habit. And it's about the way we form habits, try to break habits, and it's just a really interesting episode. So that's my recommended, A Creature of Habit. And as always, there'll be a link in the show notes.
And I guess I do have a recommended. A podcast came out recently on Risk of Ruin. And the latest one is I'm featured along with Mickey Krim as two guys who played a lot of video poker successfully in the 90s with very different approaches. So if you've read my $1 Million Video Poker autobiography, most of the stories I tell will be familiar to you. There'll be some that are different. Mickey does things differently than I do. He's been on this show a couple times, have a lot of respect for him. So an earlier show in that series featured Richard and some other players. So it's the Risk of Ruin podcast done by John Reeder. Check it out. So Vecnan, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
Kind of.
Tell us.
I don't know if it'll happen again is the problem. I attended RX Gamble's webinar that she did yesterday, and really enjoyed it. I'll admit that I'm kind of more into longevity than I think most card counters are, and I did know most of the information. There wasn't a ton of new things in there that were just entirely mind-blowing, but just kind of hearing someone at a high level talk about those things and kind of figuring out how she thinks about existing in the game for as long as she has was really valuable. So again, I don't know if she'll do it again, but I actually really enjoyed it and would recommend that anybody participate in another one if there is one.
Yes, she's been on our show. I suspect it was a good class. Thank you very much, Vecnan. Thank you, Richard. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.